made up there a couple times. I just ran from Oconto up to the river on days where I could, and it was kind of.
I got a cousin that lives up there. He said there was hundreds of walleyes at the dam last week.
Yep. They all sucked in, and then they all sucked right back out. Yep. And it was weird because those fish were spawning before Oconto, which was really weird. I went up there the day. When was that? I think it was last Tuesday or Wednesday, and I actually saw fish up in like 2-3 feet of water, like spawning, like rolling around on top of each other. And they hadn't been doing that in Oconto yet, which was really goofy because normally it starts south and works its way up. And yeah, Peshtigo went before. Yep. So, but there's so many fish and that's so much water that, you know, as they're coming out of the river, they're going to be spilling out for basically 2 weeks. But depending on the day, like last year, Oconto basically emptied in like 2 days. Like we watched the fish come out on side imaging and it was just like a parade of walleyes for 2 days straight. And then they were just poof, gone out in the bay. So yeah, this is the part where it's fun because when you find them, you catch a crap ton of them and they're really hungry, but you got to find them. That's the tricky part. And get away from other people.
So when they're coming out of the river, are they eating at that time?
Oh yeah.
They are.
Yep, big time. Yep, they just got done doing the hardest thing they have to do all year and they are hungry. So yep, they're chewing. And it's probably the best time to get like a legit 30 plus inch fish because they're actually hungry. So, but yeah, we didn't get anything over 30 this spring, which kind of sucks. We got 2 that were like right at 30 and the biggest was 11.2 pounds. So it's pretty cool. I think we had 8 or 9-ish in the 10 plus pound range, which was pretty cool. So yeah, it was fun. You get really spoiled up there. It's pretty silly.
Hear somebody come in, just give a look.
Pretty
and make
silly.
Sure
and usually the crappier the weather, the better the fishing is. There's less people. That helps. So.
Ready?
Sure.
All right. Hey everyone, my name's Pat Hasberg. My wife and I own the shop here. If you don't know me, I see a lot of familiar faces, but some new folks too. So I appreciate you all coming out. Rainy night, but super happy to keep these seminar series going. Gene did them for a long time, and happy to keep that tradition going. And he has a long history of having great speakers, and tonight's no different with Noah being here. He always does a great job. Noah is officially a captain now. He has his captain's license. That was new in
last fall.
Fall, yeah. Yep. So guiding out on the Great Lakes, but of course around town here. Does a great job, very popular. Please hire him if you're interested. He's really knows his stuff, as you're about to see. I do want to, one more time, make sure you fill out a little blue tag up there. We do a little raffle at the end, prize drawing. Sorry, I can't say legally, I can't say raffle. But prize drawing. And I also want to let everybody know we're doing 10% off anything in the shop. So if you want to pick something up, feel free, and we'll have the register open till everyone's gone. So I don't know if I forgot anything, but let's give a round of applause for Noah. And yeah, thanks again.
This never gets any easier. I do a lot of speaking engagements usually over the winter, and the first 5 minutes of these is usually really awkward and weird because I'm actually a really introverted person, which is kind of a bad thing when you take people fishing every day, but I'll get over it here in a little bit. We also got to let the tacos kind of settle a little bit. It's Enrique's, right?
Enrique's.
On the other side of the building here, if you guys want some like legit tacos, Enrique's is really, really good.
Best in Madison.
Like really good. Yeah, so I don't know. That was too many pats on the back. Hi, for those of you who don't know me, my name's Noah. I'm a kid who grew up in Monona, 3 blocks from Schluter Beach, or the bait shop if you're a Monona kid. I made a lot of bad life choices, and now I go fishing for a job. It's pretty cool. And I will be the first to tell you, you are not going to get rich fishing for a living, but you have a heck of a lot of fun. So, obviously growing up around here, I know the lakes pretty well. I would hope so. It's Madison Angling Guide Service. I would hope I know these lakes pretty well. But growing up, we didn't have a boat. I had a bike and my feet. So did a lot of shore banging as a kid. And I didn't get my first boat till I was in college, and then it was all downhill after there. So, but anyway, I keep these things pretty informal, and I'm kind of getting a little screwed up here because there's so many familiar faces, and a lot of these people come to a lot of my talks, and I don't know why they keep coming back. So, yeah, that's pretty cool. So I want to say thank you to all of you who came out tonight. That's really cool. I know it's crappy out, and that probably helped make your decision a little easier, but I really appreciate you guys taking time to come out here. So, yes, I am a captain now, which is kind of cool. So I do run salmon trips on Lake Michigan as well as walleye and muskie trips on Green Bay, which is super fun, which I've been doing a lot of this spring. And I'm not going to lie, it's been really hard to come home when I have to come home. I have actually, he's going to be 1 year old on Sunday. So I have to come home and do dad stuff. But if he wasn't in the picture, I would for sure still be in Green Bay right now because that place is silly. But Madison has some unbelievable fishing opportunities, obviously. And we're going to talk about how to kind of capitalize on some of those opportunities here coming into opening weekend, which is what, 3 weeks?
May 4th, yeah.
Yeah, coming up really quick. So as far as like species and stuff go, kind of covering sort of the top, I guess, 3 on most people's lists. So obviously walleyes, bass, and we're going to talk about pike and muskies, things with teeth as well. But if you guys have questions about any other species, I guess we're talking panfish a little bit too, shout them out. I like to keep these pretty informal. So if you have questions, just raise your hand and I'm going to answer it right then and there. So let's get rolling, I guess. So probably my favorite time of the year to fish is right now. Kind of this spring, going into the inland opener season type thing. Kind of this like April, May, June is kind of my favorite time to fish. I get more excited about opener than I do most holidays. Like to a point where it's kind of annoying to a lot of my close friends and my wife. Like I make a way bigger deal about opener at midnight fishing for walleyes than I do anniversaries and things like that. So I think she's a little burned out. But it's so much fun. It's literally like the closest thing I get to Christmas anymore as an adult. As far as the catchability goes, everybody's basically in the same area, right? A lot of these fish are up shallow. A good way to think about that, and I know we talk about that open water too, but like 90% of the fish are in about 10% of the water. I would even shrink that ratio a little bit more coming up here in a couple weeks. So many of these fish come up really shallow and become very accessible. And like we were just talking about with the Green Bay stuff, a lot of these fish, you know, in Madison, especially with lakes, water temperature is kind of a big factor with spawning activity. So there are still going to be some pre-spawn fish probably yet this year as far as like walleyes go. But for the most part, as we go into this first week of the season, they're going to be dropping eggs, dropping milt, and they're going to be very hungry. So post-spawn fish are very hungry. And there's obviously great opportunities both during the daytime and after dark, which is kind of my favorite time to fish when it comes down to opener. So a little housekeeping before we get rolling here. How many people fish at night opening weekend? Okay, basically my first 2 weeks of the season, I just fish after dark. Mostly just walleye fishing. And every year there's some really stupid things that I see on the water. So I just want to take a second to address that. And I'm sure nobody in this room is guilty, but I'm going to sleep better at night having said some of this stuff. So obviously everything's more dangerous and more difficult in the dark, right? You can't see. Water's already dangerous. It's cold out there. Lake Mendota's a big lake. Waves can get big, especially at night. You got to be careful. So number one, make sure your lights are working on your boat if you're fishing after dark. There were several times last year where there were boats ripping across the lake going just like mock Jesus. I don't know how fast they were going. No lights on. Nothing. I only knew there was a boat there because I could hear their motor just absolutely screaming and I could see their graph. That was it. Make sure your lights work. I know it's really inconvenient when you roll up to the ramp, dump your boat in and nothing's working, or like your nav lights aren't working, your stern light's not working, something's not working, but you're like, screw it, I'm here, I'm going. I get it, but check that stuff before you leave. Check it a few days before you plan on going. Another thing is never assume other boats can see you. A lot of this is obviously common sense, but you'd be amazed, especially if somebody's driving ridiculous. How many people have been in a bass boat going really fast, like over 70, right? Pretty hard to see. Your eyes kind of water, especially when it's cold out. At night, it gets twice as hard to see, right? So don't assume people can see you. And I don't know why people need to drive so fast after dark, but whatever. So never assume that other people can see you. Make sure you have all the flotation devices that you're required to have. A throwable, life jacket for everybody. Also, if you guys wear the inflatable life vests, they do not count unless they are on you. So you have to be wearing it the entire time. So if you get stopped, you will get a ticket for that. Also have a float plan. Let people know where you're going, especially if you're fishing after dark. Just let somebody know. It could be like your dad that you never talked to or something. Just be like, hey dude, I'm gonna be on Mendota. I'm launching here. I'm planning on being back at this time. That way, if you don't show up, they at least know where to start, right? Or they can at least figure out, you know, what truck or vehicle is yours and they can just go steal it or whatever. So have a float plan. And yeah, I don't know why people need to go super fast in the dark, but don't do that. It's stupid. So daytime, totally opposite, right? People can see really well. Be patient with people, okay? There's a lot of people, this is the first time they are going fishing for the year, the first time they're putting their boat in the water, and they might be a little rusty, and maybe their motor doesn't start, or they forget transom straps, or whatever, or their kill switch is flipped or something. Don't be an ass. Help. If you can, try to be nice and help them out. And obviously just make sure your stuff is good to go before you dump it in the water. All right, I'm done talking about stupid stuff. So how many people are gonna be fishing walleyes opening night? I should see everybody's hands up. Come on, this is like the best day ever. We get to go smash walleyes that haven't seen a bait in what, almost like 3 months, 2.5 months? They're gonna be really hungry. So we're obviously gonna start with walleyes. So like I mentioned before, you know, the first 2 weeks of the season, I'm pretty much just fishing after dark. So if you call me and wanna go bass fishing like May 7th, we're not going. I'm sorry, unless it's after dark. I'm on the night program with that. So, you know, whether you like trolling, casting, even live bait rigging in some cases, fishing after dark in shallow water is ridiculously effective. And a lot of the places I'm looking are pretty basic. And what's cool with the water being really clear this time of year is you can see the fish on a calm night. Just drive around with your headlamp and look in the water. You can actually see the fish. Now there's kind of a double-edged sword there. If you spend too much time shining light on them, you're gonna spook them, they are not gonna eat. But if you do a quick little look and it's like, oh yeah, there's like 15 glowing sets of eyeballs and it's super creepy, looking all back at the boat here, shut your light off, you know there's fish there, right? So it can be really, really easy to find these fish. This year might be a little different since we already have some weeds starting to come up. One of the things I usually do too is if I'm fishing like sand flats and stuff like that, I just drive along with my side imaging and look for fish. This is a good time to get good at using your electronics. However, once we have weeds coming up, it's pretty much impossible to see them. So that kind of turns into more of a, you know, if I feel like there's fish here, there should be fish here, this is a spot where there's always fish, we'll make a run through there. If we're not getting bit, we're out of there, we're moving. So the places I'm looking, basically sand flats, any emergent vegetation, nothing that's super thick, but anywhere that you have good green weeds starting to grow. Generally, that's where the first bug activity is gonna be. That's where the bait fish are gonna be. That's where the predators are gonna be. And obviously rocks, and anywhere that you can find current is another big draw to these fish too. Water temperature. I don't know if you can tell by water temp in all caps 3 times there. Water temperature is a huge, huge factor, especially when we're dealing with a big lake like Mendota, where you could see upwards of a 12 to 15 degree temperature swing in like 20, 30 yards. It's crazy. So that's something that you really need to pay attention to while you're fishing is watch your graph and keep an eye on the temperature. If you're catching fish, look at the graph. If you're not catching fish, look at the graph. And more times than not, you're gonna see some kind of a pattern. And even if you're in an area where, you know, it seems like it's a very consistent space, right? Even just a few degree water temperature difference can push the fish out of an area. So generally they're gonna be in the warmer water, not the cooler water. So one example of that is up along the north end of the lake on Mendota. And Pat was super prepared here and got all the maps out. So basically this whole north end here, coming down out of North Bay, kind of this big main lake break here. That's one of those spots where you can really see temperature make a huge difference because you have all that warm water coming in from Cherokee Marsh and that big shallow flat up there. And as soon as it hits that main lake, that main basin, it's almost like a cement wall where warm water meets cold water. And it's amazing how you can go literally probably less than 20 yards over that line and you are not catching fish. But if you are on the other side of the line, you're absolutely smashing them. It's pretty wild, so pay attention to water temperature. And also don't fish fast. People fish way, way, way too fast in the spring. You gotta remember this water's cold, right? It's cold. These fish aren't moving super fast. So big fancy word for you guys, stenotherm. Does anyone know what that means? Nobody? Okay. Basically means cold-blooded. So anything that is, their metabolism is controlled by the environment, which fish are. Obviously, colder it is, the lower their metabolism, the warmer it is, the higher. So even in warm water, these fish are still a little lethargic, right? So we don't want to be fishing too fast. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. Any questions so far? I'm that good? Wow, all right. Cool. So matching the hatch. So here in Madison, our forage base is predominantly panfish. But as far as like minnow species go, brook silversides, golden shiners, and there are actually fathead minnows in the Madison chain too, go figure. But perch are definitely on the menu for a lot of these fish and even small bluegills. So that was one that a walleye puked up. Actually, that was last spring. That was with you. And that's a Perfect 10 Rogue. So basically about the same size, about the same profile. And that was about a 5.5 inch perch or so. And that got puked up out of like a 22-inch walleye probably, which is a pretty big meal for a fish that size when you think about it. So I guess where I'm going with that is don't be afraid to go a little bit bigger. And I'm going to talk about that here in a minute. But as far as bait selection goes, predominantly stick baits this time of year. I do know guys that pull flicker shads and shad wraps and things like that, but for me, day in and day out, stick baits are kind of the move. A little bit more of a subtle action to them. These are kind of my top 3 here. I'll pass these around so you guys can check these out. Probably nothing new, but there is one new bait in there that's pretty cool, and I got a chance to play with it. And it's pretty sweet. They're not cheap, but they're definitely worth it. But yeah, stick baits kind of have more of a softer action to them. And anything in that like 4 to 5.5 inch range is pretty much perfect. So I used to fish with a lot of smaller baits like number 8, number 10 husky jerks. I kind of got away from that, mostly because I can get away with bigger baits and weeding out some of the smaller fish. There's a lot of big fish in the Madison chain, so don't be afraid to run some of these bigger baits. So for me, basically slow rise or suspending bait. So Perfect 10 Rogues, Husky Jerk number 12, Shallow Bandits work really well. And basically the smallest I've been going are the Rapala Shadow Wrap Shads, the number 9s. Which is a little bit bigger than a number 10 Husky Jerk. So not a super big bait, but that's about as small as I've been going the last couple of years. And I pretty much only put those out if we're having a tough time getting bit. But the P10s and the HJ12s are definitely the move. Any questions on those? Surprised nobody asked what my favorite color is. Not one person, and now doesn't matter. I'm just kidding. If I had to pick one color, black and gold. Black and gold has been probably my number one day in, day out. Another really good one is blue chrome, blue back, chrome sides, orange belly, and anything that looks relatively perchy. Even the crazy colors too. So I got one kind of crazy looking husky jerk rolling around here. That one was pretty good last year as well. Kind of that pink, chartreuse, white. That thing was pretty good as well. So how many people troll? Okay, quite a few. With planer boards, I'm assuming. Do planer boards scare anybody in here? Okay. I appreciate the honesty. We're going to talk you through it. It's going to be okay, I promise. It's not as scary as it looks. So obviously running planer boards at night, you know, if you've never ran planer boards, doing it at night is not a great time to do it, but it's very doable and it's a lot more manageable than you think. So when people are new to fishing with planer boards, I tell them just to start with one board on each side. And most people's budget will allow for that because these are not cheap, but you buy them once, basically buy once, cry once, and you got them forever. I still have, this is not one of them, but I bought my first set of planer boards when I was in high school, and I still have them, and I use them a lot. So they last a really, really long time. So lights, right? We like lights. We like being able to see things, not only so you can see when you get bit, but also so people know that you have planer boards out. If you've ever fished the Fox River in De Pere at night in March and April trolling, you will understand why this is important because there's so many people who don't put lights on their boards and they get their boards ran over and it's a nightmare. So lights on your boards are a good thing. So I run the offshore, just kind of the standard walleye boards, the OR32, I believe. You don't need tattle flags on them, not for nighttime because you're basically just watching that light. And when you see the light go jerking backwards, you got to fish, right? So I'll pass this around so you guys can kind of see how I have this rigged up. Basically, it's a submersible LED tea light. You can get a big pack of them on Amazon for like 12 bucks. I kind of lube up the threads with some Vaseline, and you can get whatever color you want, but obviously I do green on the starboard side, red on the port side. That way people also know what direction you're going in, which is pretty cool too. So with planer boards, for those of you who are maybe scared of them, basically it's just a bobber that pulls your line out to the side and keeps your stuff from getting messed up. Do you have to use boards? No, but when you're fishing super shallow, I do think there's an advantage to it because if you have, like, for example, I run a Ranger 620, so if I were a 20-something inch walleye and a 20.5 foot something goes floating over top of my head in 6 feet of water, I'm probably gonna bolt. So getting your lines away from the boat in shallow water definitely helps. And that's where these boards work really well. Another thing to touch on with the boards, don't ever be afraid to run your baits a ridiculously short distance behind your planer board. Like real short, I'm talking like 8 feet, 10 feet, really, really, really short. I promise you they do not care. They have no issue with a board going over top of them. So if you want to get like stupid shallow, like 3 feet of water, you can totally do that. Run your bait 10 feet back behind a board. Don't worry about it. They're not going to be freaked out by it. Excuse me. As far as like gear goes, pretty standard stuff. I did switch up my trolling rods a couple years ago. And instead of using an 8.5, 9 footer like I have pretty much my entire life, I went down to a 710 and it's a one-piece rod, which is kind of sweet. So this fits in my rod locker. Not that, you know, a telescopic trolling rod doesn't, but these are also a heck of a lot more fun to use. I'll pass this around. This is a Fox River Rod 710. It's a lot like fighting them on a spinning rod. If you look at how kind of thin the blank is, it's a graphite carbon blank, but it's almost more like you're fighting them on a spinning rod, which is sort of more fun than a big dumb glass planer board rod, but they have plenty of power. So I'll pass this around so you can see it. Just a standard line counter reel, 10-pound mono. I do have a 15-pound fluoro leader on here right now because I've been up on Green Bay, so dealing with zebra mussels and stuff. Yes?
Tell people not to hit the fan.
Oh yeah, there's a fan. Try not to hit that. No, my buddy Jordan, who owns Fox River, just sent me a message today and said he got more trolling rods in, so if you do put it in the fan, it's okay. But don't. But yeah, pretty standard stuff, but I actually like these shorter rods for basically 2 reasons. One, they fit in a rod locker really nice, and 2, when you're fighting a fish, people don't have to back up as far in the boat when you're taking the board off and when you scoop the fish. And if you're fishing alone, you're not dealing with an 8.5, 9 foot rod. You're basically fishing with a spinning rod. It's a lot easier to get fish in the net by yourself. So yeah, those things are super fun. Big fan of those. So yeah, we talked about the length here. As far as like how far back to run your baits behind the board, it's totally up to you. I usually go no more than 25 feet back for the most part. And I'm not usually fishing deeper than about 7, 8 feet of water for the most part, especially opener. Now, obviously the weeds are gonna have a big role in how deep I'm gonna be fishing for opener this year. And also, midnight is open. I had it booked, and the guy who had it booked had some kind of emergency heart surgery, I think this last week. So he's out. So if anyone wants to go out on midnight, let me know. You can come out and figure this out with me. It's pretty fun. But generally 15 to 25 feet back, and most of the time I split the difference and put everything back 20 feet. And that's with a P10. But generally 15 to 25 feet back, and most of the time I split the difference and put everything back 20 feet. And that's with a P10, a husky jerk, a shadow wrap, doesn't matter. Because again, we're fishing shallow water. These fish can see your bait, no problem. Shallow and clear. So, you know, if they have to come up 3 feet to hit your bait, that's basically a tail kick and a half for a mid 20-inch walleye to come up and grab it. So it's always better to fish over them than underneath them, obviously. If you look at a walleye, a muskie, a pike, any kind of predator, their eyes are looking forward and up. They're not looking down. So having your bait above them, it's not a problem. And as far as speed goes, usually 1.2 to 1.8. I am almost never going over 2 miles an hour. Very, very rarely. And if you start running into white bass, which is always possible, especially with how warm everything's kind of getting, slow down even a little bit more. It seems if your baits are just creeping along like ridiculously slow, you know, 0.8 to about 1.2 or so, it seems like the white bass kind of leave them alone, but the walleyes will still eat them, which is kind of goofy. So just a fun little tip for people that get pissed off about white bass, because I do too. Depends on what we got going on for wind. Yep, so if I can, I'm gonna run my bow mount just to keep it a lot more quiet. But if it's windy out and I'm kind of fighting, I'll run the kicker. Yep, so I do both. I do both. But yeah, usually running the electric just to keep things quiet. All right, and then for the casters, which if it does end up getting really, really weedy by opener, I'm probably gonna do more casting than trolling. And honestly, they're both really fun, but I think casting's a little more fun. And that's basically all we've done up on Green Bay this spring. I've trolled 2 or 3 times just for fun. But otherwise, I've been casting my entire spring on Green Bay, and it's so much more fun than trolling. So for the people who don't want to troll or are scared to troll, casting works just fine. So basically running a medium light spinning rod, 15-ish pound braid. You can go down to 10, 8, whatever you want to use. I run 15. Some kind of a fluoro leader. I usually run about a 12 to 15 pound fluoro leader. And if you're fishing, especially if you're fishing Monona or Wabisa, you need to run some kind of a leader. Otherwise you're gonna get bit off. There's a lot of toothy things down there. Walleyes are not gonna bite you off. Pike will and muskie will. So Pat actually has this Cortland stainless tieable wire. So I use actually a brand that doesn't make wire anymore, which is super annoying. Terminator, which is a Rapala brand. They made a nickel titanium wire that was tieable. You can tie leaders with it. Apparently they don't make that stuff anymore, but this stuff works just as well. Really thin diameter. It's about, you can get 10, 15, 20 pound. 15 is about perfect. And you don't have to worry about it not being stealthy enough. These fish do not care. They 100% don't care at all, especially fishing at night. The one thing you want to watch though is when you make your leaders, you don't want them to be too long. So I usually make them about 8 inches or so. That's probably 8, right? Ish, about 8 inches or so, which gives you just enough length that if you do get smacked by a muskie, you should be fine. But if you make it too long, you can kind of throw off the balance of your jerkbait. That's kind of the trick. So depending on what you're throwing for a jerkbait, so basically the same stuff we're trolling, husky jerk, shadow wraps, P10s, things like that. Those are the same baits we're casting. Depending on the bait, actually one of them, the Maverick, that one that went around, that new gold one, those are actually pretty much a dead nuts true suspending jerkbait. Or if you guys throw the Megabass stuff, the Vision 110s and things like that, if you have too much leader, your bait's gonna sink. It's gonna be too heavy, it's gonna mess with the action. But if you're a husky jerk guy, shadow wrap guy, X-wrap guy, you should be fine. It seems like they're supposed to be a suspending bait, but most of them are kind of more of a slow rise. You've got a little bit of wiggle room there with those. Also at the same time, most of these fish just don't care. They see something and they smack it. But the key with the casting stuff, and again, every night is different. We've caught them straight retrieving plenty of times, but it's the twitch, let it hang, pause, and they almost always eat it on the pause. Playing with the length of the pause is really the key to figuring out the jerkbait fish. There's nights when they want it hanging there for 8 to 10 seconds, which is a painfully long time. So just so everybody knows, this is about 10 seconds. Twitch, twitch. Twitch, twitch. That's a really long time, right? Usually, it doesn't have to take quite such a long twitch. That's more on a cold front kind of a situation. A lot of times those fish will slow down a little bit. We'll give them really long twitches. But just a pop, pop, let it hang a couple seconds, pop, pop, let it hang a couple seconds. And when you can, I like to kind of switch it up a little bit. I don't want it to be perfectly rhythmic the entire retrieve, and I do the same thing with muskies as well. Kind of switch it up. So I'll do 1 twitch, then I'll do 3 twitches, then I'll do 2 twitches, then I'll go back to 3 twitches, then I'll do 1 twitch. Kind of switching it up all the time and make it as erratic as possible, because it does seem like if you actually get a chance to watch a walleye chase a jerkbait, and in the right conditions you can, if you keep doing the same thing over and over again, a lot of times they'll just keep following it, and then they almost seem to lose interest and kind of take off. But if you keep switching it up and doing weird stuff, a lot of times they'll chase it almost all the way to the boat if they don't eat it. So that's just one little thing that I kind of picked up on over the years. So play around with your retrieve and try not to make it super consistent. Yes.
This on your trolling too?
Yeah, so on Monona, Wabisa, I run that stuff. Yep.
So you have a fluorocarbon leader and this?
No, yeah, so on that trolling rod, I only have that fluoro on there because of zebra mussels on Green Bay. Otherwise, I just run straight mono. Yep, yeah, and obviously you run into pike and stuff on Mendota, but I don't seem to get bit off as often on pike. I seem to actually get bit off more on Monona and Wabisa, so. And you can definitely run that stuff during the daytime too. I don't think they care. I really don't, and it'll save you a lot of money. But if you're fishing Monona Wabisa, it's a good idea to run some wire. And also, if you're late getting out, like let's say somebody overslept or whatever, there's almost always a really good window right when the sun, like 20 minutes before the sun comes up and about 20 minutes after the sun comes up. So this was a couple years ago. We ran, actually this was opening night, and I lost count after like 60 something fish. And this was right as the sun came up, and I told these guys, I'm like, we're gonna have one more pass and we're gonna get like 1 or 2 big ones, and then it's just gonna be over. Done, dead, over. And as soon as I said that, we doubled up, and that was on Mendota up by Governor's Island, which was pretty sweet. And then we made one more pass and didn't catch anything. It's pretty cool. So there does seem to be windows, and that's kind of the point I'm making with that, where you may not go out and just start railing right away, right? It might take a little bit. And usually we start basically right at dark, so around 7 o'clock or so. Obviously not an opener, don't do that. Start at midnight. But after opener, we start right at dark, and a lot of times we don't get bit for about 20, 30 minutes. That's pretty normal. And the reason I start early is because a lot of the people I fish with don't know how to run planer boards if we're trolling. So it gives them a little better idea of how things are set up, where everything is, so that way when it does get dark, we have a little bit of a battle plan, going into darkness. So, but it does go in waves, so don't get discouraged. If you're catching fish and all of a sudden you don't, just wait it out. They'll probably start biting again 15, 20 minutes or so. But they do seem to kind of go through windows. All right, daytime walleyes. How many people struggle catching them opening week during the daytime? Anybody? A few people? That's okay. That's fine. That's why we're here. I do too. That's why I spend my first 2 weeks fishing at night, because it's so much easier. So it can be a little bit tricky. Obviously, location is a big part of this. And I don't know. A lot of this, again, this is something I always start with, and I didn't say it. I'm all screwed up, man. I don't know. Anyway, I got like no sleep last night. My kid didn't sleep, and I'm already on no sleep. But where was I going with this? Everything I'm telling you guys tonight, shut up. This is just my opinion, right? There's no rules to any of this. I'm not going to tell you that it has to be this way. You have to use this bait in this spot and this color on this day. There's no rules, but this is just stuff that works for me and things that I've found out over the years through a lot of experimenting. And the only difference between me and a lot of people is I just get to go fishing more. Gives me more opportunities to find things out, right? So does this work all the time? No, but it can work pretty well. So does anybody recognize what bait that is in the net? A rip and wrap. Kind of weird, right? You know, this isn't Green Bay. That was a Mendota fish, and it was in 3 feet of water. Kind of weird, right? You don't really hear about rip and wraps and walleyes in Madison too much. So they are very much catchable during the daytime. However, it is more challenging, right? Because A, we got sunlight. B, they're up shallow. A lot of these fish are still up shallow. There are fish out a little deeper, but a lot of them are shallow. C, you got boat traffic. That doesn't help. And D, you got really clear water. They have really good eyesight, especially during the daytime. Walleyes have really good eyesight when it's light out. So you got a lot of things working against you, but there are ways to get these fish to eat. So generally, I'm looking in the same places during the day that I am at night. So big shallow sand flats, anywhere I've got good vegetation coming up out of the bottom, and areas with current, and also kind of bays, shallow bays that seem to be holding lots of panfish. If you can find an abundance of like small bluegills and crappies and perch, little bait fish, there's gonna be walleyes in the area. It's actually pretty wild. How many people catch walleyes when they go bass fishing in like April? Handful of people? Yeah, absolutely. They're all hanging out together. They're where the food is. So as far as catching them goes, this is where it gets kind of interesting. So there's kind of more obvious things, right? Like, you know, running a small paddle tail, something like one of these little Kitech, you know, little 3-inch shiner type dudes on a light little jig head, an 1/8 ounce jig or a 1/4 ounce jig, just a slow roll, just above the weeds or just off the bottom. Jerk baits, shadow wraps and husky jerks work awesome, especially anything perch. And I like these shadow wrap minnow. It's a number 11. It's a slow sink. Those seem to work, really well, even casting in shallow water. And when I'm saying shallow, I'm talking like 3 to 6 feet of water. Really, really, really shallow water. This is the weird one. The rip and wraps. And I use both 6s and 5s. So the 5 is the ultralight, that's like the crappie size, and the 6 is kind of what most people are throwing up on Green Bay, even up to a 7. But in Madison, a lot of the forage is relatively small, right? I know those stick baits are pretty big, but that number 6 works really, really well. And all we're doing is casting this thing out, rod tip up, straight retrieving it. Dum, 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 dum. Just like a red-eye shad or a rattle and rapple like you fish for bass. Same exact thing, just above the bottom or just above the weeds, just straight retrieving it. And when they eat these things, they absolutely freaking murder them. It's unbelievable. How did we figure that out? I don't know. I had a kid throwing a rip and wrap because I was like, here, he just couldn't handle the jerkbait thing. So I'm like, dude, just cast this around and catch a bass or something. And he just started railing on walleyes. I'm like, there's no freaking way this actually works. It works pretty darn well. I would also highly recommend running some kind of a bite-proof leader on these because there's plenty of pike in these areas too, as well as muskies. But just a straight retrieve on those rip and wraps. Thud, 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 thud. It's pretty wild, even in 2-3 feet of water. So basically, as soon as that bait hits the water, because they do sink, you gotta start reeling. And if you feel weeds on it, give it a hard rip, try to get the weeds off. And a lot of times after you clear weeds off and give it a rip and you catch back up to it, boom, they'll hit it. It's pretty nuts. So that's the weird one, and it does work really well. And my buddy Rich isn't here tonight to vouch for that working really, really well. We did that last spring, and he did not believe me. In first cast, I got like a 25-incher, and he's like, holy crap. I'm like, yeah, dude, this actually works. Another one are just small crankbaits, little bitty crankbaits. This is a nightmare to cast, but if you can cast it or you have the right wind, try it. The old floating Selmo Hornet number 4. As far as color goes, play around with it, whatever the heck that thing is, kind of like I think it's bullhead maybe is what it's called. I have no idea. But kind of a perchy looking dude, that works really, really well. Another one is the Money Badger, Berkeley Money Badger in size 5. Not sponsored by either of these companies, so Berkeley, send the check. But they work really well. So anything small, obviously, but with a really quick kind of erratic action. And I think that's why the rip and wraps work really well, is because it's burning past them pretty quick. To keep that bait off the bottom, you got to be moving it pretty quickly. I think it's just a reaction. I think they're just snapping on it. And actually several times we've had fish hit the bait like multiple times. You'll feel the thump, 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 and then you miss them, and then they eat it like right at your feet. And when they hit it very, very hard. So I think we're just kind of getting an aggressive reaction out of these fish with all of these baits. Going with the more finesse approach, just a slip bobber and a half a crawler or a minnow, a fathead minnow. Same thing you use for crappies. Same exact thing you use for crappies. And you're gonna catch everything. That's another part of this too, and which makes it kind of fun, also sort of annoying depending on your objective. You're gonna catch bass, you're gonna catch pike, you're gonna catch muskies, you might even catch catfish. Big crappies, you don't get little crappies doing this, you get big crappies. You're gonna catch all kinds of stuff. But yeah, just a minnow or half a night crawler on a small jig under a slip bobber works just fine. But yeah, the walleye thing, it works really well, especially those lipless cranks. So what if you're fishing like a ridiculously big, shallow area, right? You're covering a ton of water. You know there's fish there. Let's say you're fishing there the night before, caught the heck out of them trolling. How do you fish that during the daytime? You can break it down and cast it if you want to, but you can 100% troll during the daytime as well. And I will say, overcast days, windy days, it seems to be more effective. On flat, calm, sunny days, it's definitely a little bit trickier. I do downsize during the daytime a little bit though. So I'll go down from those number 12 Husky jerks and those P10s. I'll go down to like a number 10 Husky jerk, something a little bit smaller. I don't know why, but it seems like during the daytime I catch more fish on the smaller baits, and at night I catch fish on the bigger baits. You can definitely catch them on P10s during the daytime, but if you want to catch fish, it seems like downsizing works a lot better. And again, you're going to catch all kinds of different stuff, especially during the daytime. Everybody's awake and everybody's eating. Another thing, I didn't bring any with me, which is kind of a bummer. I usually will have mini planer boards. There's a crappie size planer board, and you can get them from all different manufacturers, but Offshore makes one that's reversible, so you can switch sides. So like that planer board I passed around, they are directional. There's a left side and a right side, but on the mini crappie boards, you can switch sides, which is pretty cool. And you can run them on a spinning rod, which is pretty sweet. So I usually have about a half dozen of those things just in my glove box all the time in the boat. And on days where everything sucks and I hate my life and we cannot catch fish, we'll put out a bunch of little Husky jerks or little shadow wraps or something on spinning rods with the mini crappie boards, throw them in rod holders and just go. And usually we'll save the day catching fish doing that. And we catch a lot of walleyes doing that too. And again, fishing that anywhere from 3 to 6, 7 feet of water. And generally during the daytime, it's more of a weed bite. It seems like the fish in the weeds are a little bit easier to catch. Any walleye questions? Does anybody need any spiritual guidance or want to talk about their feelings or?
I got one.
Yes.
Do you have a favorite shore fishing spot in Mendota for walleye?
Ooh,
At night?
I do. If I had to pick one, it's actually my all-time favorite shore fishing spot for just about everything, right down the road at Tenny Park. Tenny Park, because you got everything. You have sand flats, you have weeds, you have current, and you have the river. So you've got so many different things in one area that no matter what, there's fish somewhere. Yep.
Thank you.
Tenny's great. Yep. Another good one is Warner Park, right off the break wall at Warner Park up the road here, and Marshall Park's another good one too. The entire universe, like the UW Union shoreline, that can be really good too.
Great.
Yep. It just depends on the weeds. Any other walleye questions? Yes.
When you're tying those leaders, do you use like a swivel or a snap for them, or you tie them direct to the lure?
Yeah, so I do put a small just cross-lock snap on one end, and to make my life easier, I used to do an Albright knot straight to my main line or, fluoro, whatever. I'm lazy, so I just started using swivels, and it makes life so much easier, especially in the dark. So, yep, swivel on one end, a little snap on the other works great. Yep. And if you want, and I didn't even really talk about tying those leaders, and I can talk to you guys more about it afterwards if you're interested. With that stainless wire that went around here that Pat carries, you can crimp that stuff if you want. You don't have to tie knots. So normally I would just tie a clinch knot, just a regular fisherman knot, right? 5-6 twists through the loop, pull it tight. With stainless, you can crimp it. Don't do that with titanium. Titanium is brittle, especially since there's nickel in it. The more nickel there is in something, the more brittle it usually is, right? So if you crimp it wrong or you crimp it too tight, you can compromise the wire and break it. So I would avoid crimping if you use titanium wire, but go ahead and crimp stainless. That'll work just fine.
No, I live on the south end of Mendota, and so I'm normally launching like at Spring Harbor, so I
Yeah.
feed that end of the lake.
Yep.
But should I, in the spring, should I actually be fishing Warner and the North Shore instead?
It all depends on water temp. That's the biggest key. Yep, that's the big thing.
It's getting the sun.
It's getting a lot of sun, and with all that flow, because there's always water obviously coming into the lake. Everything flows kind of north to south in Madison. So there's a lot of water that comes in from Cherokee, and all that water is super warm. So that whole north end of the lake, that stays pretty warm. And depending on which way the wind is going, you know, if you get a kind of a west or northwest wind, a lot of that water will kind of get sucked out into the lake, and it'll wrap around Governor's Island and kind of back up into Warner. Sometimes it'll slide over in front of Tenney, and sometimes
Don't
it'll go
listen
down
to
kind of by
anything these guys
Fox
say,
Bluff and stuff
first
on the
of all.
west shore there.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of that Marshall Park area it's great,
I don't
but
know
usually
this
that
is a
turns on a
pocket
little bit
distance.
later, and that's usually when the weeds start to come up a little bit higher. And I think it's more of a water temp thing because it's so close to that basin that water stays
call your
cooler
mom,
longer, and that's kind of like the
text your
Tenney
mom and tell her
shoreline
she's
too,
gotta pick you up
just
when
off
she's
of
done with
Brearley
work or
Bars
whatever.
and kind
You
of
did?
city shoreline. That water stays a
phone's
little
dead.
bit cooler.
Well,
So
she'll figure it out.
usually when the north end bite kind of dies, that's when the Tenney bite can get really good. The Marshall Park bite can get really good. So the first week or so, the north end is where I would start. But then once things start to warm up, then go fish close to home. Definitely. Yep. And daytime, that's one of my favorite places to fish, is that basically Pheasant Branch all the way up that entire shoreline. It's really, really good. Really good, especially when that deep weed edge kind of gets going and the weeds are about 5-6 feet off the bottom and about 14 feet. Midday, that can be killer, especially trolling. That can be really good. Any other wild? Yes.
You haven't mentioned any types of fishing that involve like bottom contacts, like snap jigging plastics off the bottom and jigging wraps and things like that.
Yep.
Do you have much luck?
Occasionally, I'll do the rip and wrap thing. Even after dark, if we're just fishing sand flats, we'll cast and, just kind of rip, let it fall, rip, let it fall. Honestly, I don't really mess around with it too much. I've caught enough fish, or I catch enough fish, I guess, trolling and casting more suspending baits than I do anything else. So I'm just like, that's just kind of my program. But that doesn't mean it won't work. It just means I haven't done a lot of it. So definitely worth trying. Absolutely. Daytime though, and I kind of touched on that just a little bit, but just like a small jig and plastic, like a little 3-inch or 2.5, 2 3/4 inch paddle tail type thing, just kind of ticking bottom, that can work pretty well too, especially if you're in current. And I know a lot of guys who fish, in the spillway over at Tenney, or what's the other one? Over Babcock's another one, and actually Olbrick, especially after a big rain, the creek there dumping a bunch of water, and that can be really good. I know a lot of guys that throw plastics on jigs over in those areas and do pretty well. So, but I'm spending most of my time just kind of out in currentless water, I guess. So that's where I would start if I was going to use one of those techniques, is somewhere that has current. Yep. But that's a good question. Definitely a good question. Any other walleye stuff? I answered all of your walleye questions. Really? That's it? Yes.
And when you're casting the plastics, are you using like a ball jig, or are you using more like a fish head jig? Or?
Honestly, in super shallow water, I don't think it makes that big of a difference. Yep. So whatever I have laying around, I'm not too picky. When I start fishing deep, and especially if I'm fishing a lot of current, then I get a little more picky about what jig I'm using. But around here, you can use just a regular gumball style jig. It works just fine. Yep. Don't get too picky with it. Just make sure you got a long enough shank. So don't use like a gumball or not a gumball jig. What am I trying to say? Fireball jig. The short shank live bait, yeah, make sure you get a longer shank. But yeah, anything will work.
Rattle make a difference?
I have no idea if it does or not. Honestly, I don't know. I've run obviously totally silent baits. We'll run like scatter wraps. That's another one I didn't mention, the Rapala scatter wrap, number 11. It's just a floating Rapala with a goofy looking lip on the front, and they kind of walk a little. That's a really good one. Totally silent bait, no rattles whatsoever. Those work just as well next to a husky jerk that's super loud. So I haven't noticed a discernible difference, but I'm sure on certain occasions it could make a difference. And I would think if you're fishing an area that has a lot of people, going to something silent might be the way to go. That definitely happens on Lake Michigan. I've had several nights where we, everybody's using P10 noxious stuff, and we put out all silent, basically just floating Rapalas, and we absolutely kick ass. So whether or not it's the noise that's making a difference, the profile, I'm not sure, or we're just better. I don't know. It's definitely not that. It's definitely not that. That I don't know, but around here I haven't really noticed much of a difference. But definitely something to play with and keep track of. See, now you got the gears turning. Now I'm asking myself questions and starting to second guess myself a little bit. That's good though. That's what's fun about fishing. I don't think anybody ever has fishing totally mastered. I think we're basically all doctors practicing fishing, right? Like there's no doctor that has anything absolutely dialed, right? They're practicing medicine. We're practicing fishing. That's what makes it fun. You're always learning stuff. All right, we got to talk about bass. I'm sorry. How many bass guys are in here? A few people. You got the bullet sweatshirt. I know you're a bass guy. Anybody else? Yeah, nobody's perfect. All right. I'm going to make you feel really bad. Bass fishing is easy. I'm just kidding. I started out as a bass guy. The fish with teeth thing didn't really happen until like high school, late in high school, and then college. And even then in college, I was kind of back and forth. So I used to do smart people things once upon a time. I went to UW Platteville. I started in mechanical engineering. Didn't make it that far in mechanical engineering, especially when you're not that good at math. It's not so much I'm not good at math, it's just I didn't want to do math for the sake of doing math, and I seriously underestimated the amount of math. So I ended up switching to biology, which was way more fun and you don't make any money in. And it does not tie into the fishing thing whatsoever. People are like, oh yeah, you have a degree in ecology and organic chemistry. It's nothing to do with fishing at all, not even close. But my point being, I started the bass club at UW Platteville my freshman year, which was super fun. I spent more time in a bass boat and in a tree stand than I did in class, which is probably why I go fishing now. But I was really, really, really into tournament bass fishing for a long, long, long time. I started doing the Wednesday nighters here in Madison back when it was $10 a crack, and it all went downhill from there. So I am secretly a closeted bass guy, also fly fisherman, so make fun of me if you want to. But no, I actually really enjoy bass fishing, and unfortunately I don't get to do as much of it anymore as I used to. A lot of people want to go fish for fish with teeth. I like catching bass, so we got to talk about bass. In fact, I am bass fishing Saturday. I got a bass trip, and I have an opening on Monday. The weather's going to be beautiful if anyone wants to go bass fishing. So we're going to start with largies because I think largies are way easier to catch. However, the last 2 years I spent more time figuring out the smallmouth, and once you figure out where they are, holy crap is it fun. We'll talk about that in a minute. So basically, anywhere you find warm, shallow water, you're probably going to find bass. There's a really good chance, right? Especially if there's food. And I have found simple to be the most simple. Simple is usually the best answer for everything, right? More moving parts, more things go wrong, right? See, I learned something in engineering. There you go. So simple is better. So you could go out and throw A-rigs and all that stuff, which totally works right now, by the way. If you want to go catch fish on A-rigs, right now is the time to do it because they're all schooled up and they will smash an A-rig. But my assortment of stuff is probably not going to surprise any of you. It's pretty simple, but that's kind of the way to do it. I do like to try to make as long of casts as possible, especially in clear water. Now, if you're fishing mud or Cherokee or whatever, they'll eat right next to the boat. But if you're fishing the main lake on Monona or Waubesa or Mendota, long casts are kind of the move. They can be a little spooky. So if I can find dirty water, I am fishing dirty water. I do not want to fish clear water if I can help it. And as far as baits go, incredibly simple arrangement of baits. So this is number one. If you are not throwing this, just go home, quit, never go bass fishing again, throw all your stuff away, light your boat on fire, whatever, have a yard sale. If you're not throwing a red-eye shad, go home. This thing smashes. I did not pick that color for any particular reason. However, that one does work really, really well. Lipless crank. If I had to pick one bait, it would probably be a lipless crank. They absolutely straight up catch fish. Straight retrieve, nothing funky, no pop and rip, nothing like that. Cast it out, reel it in, catch a bass. Cast it out, reel it in, catch a bass. It's silly, absolutely silly. Red eye shads are killer. Another one, this is kind of a sleeper. It's been around forever. I guarantee you almost everybody in here has one of these floating around somewhere. It's probably rusty, crappy looking, got some soft plastic melted to it. Looks like shit. Oop, we're recording that. It looks like shit. And you can swear on YouTube. And that is the Rattle and Rapala. Old school, right? You get the stupid Rapala mug for Christmas from your uncle that only knows that you like fishing, and they're like, here's a mug. Got it at Menards. And this is stuffed inside the mug. These things smash. And I started playing with these more the last couple years because I wasn't catching as many fish on Rippin' Raps as I thought I would. I figured, okay, they love red-eye shads. They're going to eat a Rippin' Rap, right? They do, but not the way they eat those and not the way they eat these. I don't know if it's because this is maybe a little heavier and it dives a little bit more aggressive than the red-eye shad, so you fish it a little bit faster, especially in relatively shallow water. And I'm fishing these anywhere from 3 to 8 feet of water for the most part. You do have to fish these a little quicker to keep them out of the junk, and maybe that's why they work really well. I have no idea, but they're cheaper than Rippin' Raps, and they just straight up work. And just about every bait shop anywhere has these. Pat has a whole bunch of them, and there's a reason, because nobody buys them. There you go. There's a reason to buy them. So I am sponsored by Rapala. I get a cool deal on baits, and I get those pretty darn cheap. And they have like a clearance thing on 2 colors right now. And I bought a ridiculous number of them, and I actually got an email. They're like, are you sure? And I'm like, yeah, the numbers are right. So they work really, really well. That's kind of a sleeper, but lipless cranks are number 1 on my list. You can't go bass fishing in the spring without a swim jig or a chatterbait, right? These new ones are actually pretty cool. Not a sponsor of mine. Z-Man is not a sponsor. It'd be cool if they were though. But these new Evos are pretty sweet. It's a chatterbait on steroids. The biggest thing I see different with it is there's a molded on plastic keeper halfway down the shank of the hook. My biggest complaint, I'm sure most people's complaints with swim jigs, bladed jigs, is when you have some kind of a trailer on these, a lot of times they get pulled off the back of the bait and it makes the bait run stupid. That thing looks like it's gonna hold on to it much, much better. I have not used it yet. I'm probably gonna grab a couple of these before I leave tonight because I'm fishing bass on Saturday. Another thing too, little dab of super glue. If you're having a hard time with keeping your plastics on, little dab of super glue on the collar before you slide the plastic on. I do that with all my walleye jigs too. Little dab of plastic, jam it on there. You have to wait 30 seconds before you can cast it out. Darn. But it definitely saves the day. But a bladed jig, swim jig, you can't go wrong. There is a theme to those colors there. Kind of bluegilly. White and chartreuse. If it ain't chartreuse, it ain't no use. If you had to pick one color in Madison, it's chartreuse and white, and I don't know why that is, but it just works. Yes?
Sorry, I'm going back to the lipless.
Yes.
I've had a lot of luck a little bit later in the spring running them over the top of weeds.
Sure, yeah.
One of your YouTube videos, it looked like, I think they were in upper mud. You were catching them in April before there was weeds.
That was right about now. Yep, last year.
So they work even before, when you're not running them over weeds.
Absolutely. So basically, I was just casting along the break in the dredge hole, and the bait was landing in about 3-4 feet of water, and the fish were all sitting in about 7 feet of water or so, and I had the boat in about 14-15, and as soon as it would come off that break and get into that like 7-8 feet, boom, they were just smoking it. Absolutely crushing it.
And what was the water temperature, if you recall?
It was somewhere in the 50s. It was pretty warm. It was pretty warm, but even with that cold water, they'll still smack the crap out of those things. Absolutely. So yeah, for opener, and then like you said, kind of later on, getting closer to the spawn, kind of later May, those things murder fish later on too. Yep, once the weeds come up, especially, well, I'm not going to say it out loud. There's a few spots. If you want to learn them, book a trip. I'm just kidding. Anywhere, yeah, any kind of secondary breaks or whatever where bass are kind of staging, getting ready to come up and spawn, they school up like crazy in the spring. If you catch 1 or 2, there's going to be more than 1 or 2 in that spot. Keep casting it. Hit spot lock and just keep casting it because you're probably going to keep catching them. We had a day last spring. I want to say it was the 3rd week of May. Actually, might have been after. I think it was the last week of May. So right as they were basically about to get on beds, and we freaking murdered them in Turville Bay on red eye shads. We didn't move the boat. Like we were spot locked for, I think it was like, I have a screenshot of it, but we were there for like almost an hour. I think it was like 47 minutes or something. Did not move the boat, and it was almost every other cast we caught a fish. And our biggest was 6'2". It was stupid. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Red eye shads, if you don't have any, get some. They freaking work. Kind of a weird question. A lot of people ask me, what do you put on the back of your swim jigs? Yes. Something. Put something on the back of it. I'm not too picky. If you want to get bougie, I kind of like these guys. I don't even know what these are. 3.5-inch swim minnow. That's original. Pro Tour baits. I don't know. These little dudes, they look really good on the back of a swim jig or a bladed jig. Or if you want to get real bougie with it and really splurge, the good old Kalen's grub, baby. Whatever color you want. I like white. I don't know if white really makes that big of a difference, but 4-inch lunker grub works great on the back of those. Don't overthink it. Do you have to put something on the back? No, but I just think it looks cool, so I do it, and fish eat it. So take that for whatever it is. And I know someone's gonna get mad and probably throw things if I don't mention a square bill. How many people throw square bills in the spring? Okay, cool. Nothing special. KVD 1.5s. This is one of the most versatile little crankbaits I think there is. We use these for brown trout in the Milwaukee Harbor in the fall, which is super cool. Not that color, but anything chartreuse works pretty darn well. Just anything that runs in that like 4 to 6 foot range, you can just slow roll it, real tight action, similar to that Money Badger and that Salmo Hornet I passed around for the walleyes, just a little bit bigger for bass. I would honestly take a lipless crank over a square bill most days of the week. I know there's people that would probably fight me on that, and that's okay. I don't really care, but it's good to have a backup plan, and they're cheap enough and they work really well. So having square bills around is a good idea too. I don't know. There's something about lipless cranks that just smash. I freaking love them. I really love them, and they really love them too. So in case anyone's worried about the whole leader thing, that's a titanium leader, and that fish really did not care about it at all. Absolutely murdered it. But definitely some of the heaviest fish we catch all year are in the spring. And a lot of them are in the first couple of weeks of the season. And obviously it's catch and release right now. But basically from May 4th through the end of the month is go time for big fish. And another one too, it seems like a lot of the biggest fish we catch are on pretty windy days, and they'll be in a little bit deeper water. So yeah, that day on Upper Mud that I shot that video last year, it was pretty windy. It kind of laid down a little bit later in the day, but it was blowing pretty good when I got there. And it seems like the wind definitely concentrates these fish quite a bit. You know, we talk about that a lot, right? Like fish the wind-blown side of the lake because that's where all the bait is. I don't know if it's because there's bait there or if it's because there's warmer water there, especially in the spring. You get enough surface area moving, right? You get water backing up into areas. That's something maybe that'd be kind of worth looking at with sonar now that I think about it. I think maybe it's possibly more of a water temperature thing, but often on windy days on the wind-blown side of the lake, we get some really big fish. And usually they'll be a little bit deeper. So most of the time, I shouldn't say most of the time, you got about a 70-30 shot, I would say, in April and May on what direction the wind's coming from, whether it's a warm front or a cold front. And a lot of times it's a cold front. So on the cold front days, it seems like they push out a little bit, 8-10 feet of water, even out to 12 feet sometimes. On warm fronts, if you got a big south wind, I'll fish a little bit shallower. 8 feet will probably be the deepest I'm fishing. I'll go all the way up to about 4 feet. But on really windy days, it seems like that's when we catch the biggest fish. And the lipless cranks and spinner baits also work really well on those really windy days, especially when the water's really stirred up. There's a lot of junk floating in the water. That's when I do really well on spinner baits. Okay, let's talk about brown bass, because brown bass are cool. And I think brown bass kind of confuse people a little bit in the spring, and they confused me for a long time too. Electronics help a lot, but also just fishing stuff that makes sense works really well too. So a lot of these fish winter in deeper water most of the time. They're anywhere from 20 to 40, 50 feet of water. just laying on the bottom, doing absolutely nothing. How many people caught smallies through the ice? Few hands, but not very many, right? They're not super active through the ice, generally speaking. They do a lot of their eating in the fall, and then they just take a nap for a few months. So they're out deep, vegging out. They do eventually push up shallow. Obviously, they spawn in the spring like a lot of fish do, but they're kind of a little bit later to the party, right? They're kind of more of a, I wouldn't say cold water species, but they kind of like cooler water, right? That's why you find them deeper a lot of the time. So I'm looking for kind of more or less deeper structure, right? I'm not necessarily fishing like the rock bars, like Brearley, Second Point and stuff. There are fish out there. I'm looking for more, I guess, city shoreline type stuff, you know, a rock sand transition for the most part. I guess that's kind of what I'm getting at, is some kind of a hard to soft bottom transition where those fish are going to slide in from that deeper water and just kind of hang out there, where they're eventually going to make beds, or they can slide up real shallow, real quick and easy if they want to get up and get in some warm water. So basically the whole city shoreline on Mendota, basically everything down here is basically that, kind of a rock sand transition where it just kind of goes off into the basin. There's a lot of fish that stack up right along this shoreline here, kind of getting ready to slide up and spawn. And the same thing on Lake Monona too, up on the northeast corner. It sets up very similarly. In fact, most of the East Shore sets up very similar to that, where you have just deep basin, hard to soft bottom transition, and those fish can slide up and down really quick and easy. But generally, sandy to rocky bottom is kind of what I'm looking for. Anywhere from 8 to 15 feet of water. There are times when we do catch them shallower than that, but for the most part, kind of the 8 to 15 is where we find a lot of these fish. Obviously, the water's really clear. So far, we have not been super stealthy with a lot of our presentations, but with these smallies, they have awesome eyesight, and they're definitely a little pickier, especially in cold water. I like to go as stealthy as possible, so a lot of the things I'm throwing are relatively finesse and relatively small. If I had to pick one bait for spring smallies, especially in Madison, it's a tube. Good old tube. Nothing huge either. So these Howie's Tackle tubes, I want to say these are like 2 3/4 inch. They're just under a 3-inch tube. Don't go too big. Small is the name of the game. Basically under a 3-inch tube. Light jig head on the inside of it, you know, upwards of a 1/4 ounce. That's pretty big, and that's if I'm fishing like 15 feet or so. I'll even go down to an 1/8 ounce, just light enough that I can get to the bottom and just slowly drag that thing along the bottom. Light, tiny little hops, or even just a straight, steady, just stupid, steady, slow retrieve. Just tick, 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 hitting the bottom. And every once in a while, I'll just kind of stop it and start it again. And a lot of times you'll feel them thump it right when you stop it. They could be chasing it for a while and then grab it when it stops. Who fishes with Ned rigs? Does anyone know who Ned is? I don't. I don't know why he has a rig, but I think Ned rigs are the dumbest thing on the face of the planet. They work so freaking well though. This is a great time to throw a Ned rig as well. Same kind of presentation where you're just kind of dragging it along the bottom, and it's just kind of a little stupid chunk, just kind of dink, 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 dink along the bottom. Drop shot. How many people drop shot? Everybody should raise their hand. If you don't, you need to start drop shotting, especially all year, not just for this stuff. All year long, drop shots work incredibly well. If you want to cheat, live bait. Throw a minnow on there. The downside to fishing with minnows this time of year, especially fatheads, is it might look really shitty if you get stopped by a warden, right? Fathead minnows, fishing before walleye opener, it's kind of like, maybe don't. But we're talking about opener, so we're good to go, right? It doesn't matter what we're using. So be a little careful with that stuff before the season starts, but once we're into opener, obviously go for it. A fathead minnow on a drop shot absolutely murders fish. Now, again, that's if you are not fishing tournaments, you can fish live bait, you just want to go catch fish. You're going to catch everything that swims on it, but a fathead minnow on a drop shot absolutely murders them. Now, if you are fishing plastics because you're a purist, these little 3-inch Kitech paddle tails work awesome. Anything subtle, and I don't know what color this is, Smallmouth Magic. There you go. That's the one right there. Pick the perfect color. Anything green seems to work pretty well in Madison, generally speaking. If anyone wants to know my secret Cinco color, green pumpkin, red flake. It's a secret, don't tell anybody. I feel like most people throw that one. But any kind of a little paddle tail works great on a drop shot fish, very, very subtle. You can also put those on a jig head and just straight retrieve them, just taking the bottom really slow as well. And another one that's kind of a sleeper, these have been out for a really long time, the 360 GT swim bait by Storm. Basically the same thing. These work awesome as well. It doesn't seem like they're super popular, and I don't know why. We catch a lot of fish on them, and that rubber's pretty damn tough. They hold up to a lot of abuse pretty darn well. Been pretty impressed with those. And my computer's mad. Why? There we go. All right, we kind of covered that, blah, 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 blah. Another one, this is pretty stupid, but a 3-inch Berkeley Power Grub on a 1/8 ounce jig head. Cast it out, reel it in. Absolutely murder fish on those. And jerkbaits. Didn't really talk about jerkbaits much. The jerkbait bite can be sort of hit or miss for smallmouth. It seems like when they get closer to the spawn, kind of the 3rd week of May or so, they get a little bit more aggressive and they're more willing to come after a jerkbait. They get a little more pissy, and I think that's kind of what sets them off, is getting a jerkbait ripped past them. I probably wouldn't mess with jerkbaits until about the 3rd week of May, generally speaking. You can catch the crap out of them on jerkbaits. The pause is definitely the key, though, for sure. Nice, long pauses, and when they hit them, you'll know. They absolutely smoke it. But it seems like as they get closer to the spawn, the jerkbaits get a lot more love. All right, we got to talk about pike. How many people like catching pike? Okay, cool. Sweet. People like fish with teeth. I like that. It's every time I ask that question, I get very different responses. There's a lot of people who hate catching pike, and there's people who like catching pike. I like catching everything. But we catch some really, really big pike in the spring. Why is my computer not working? All right. So I'm going to kind of glaze over pike a little bit because I think spring pike are kind of easy to catch, in my opinion. Mostly because they're all over the frickin' place, right? And this kind of goes back to the whole 90% of the fish are in about 10% of the water theory. If there's food, there's going to be pike, right? It's the same thing with bass. If there's little bluegills around, there's going to be bass. There's also going to be pike. If there's any other species that eats other fish, there's going to be pike hanging out with them. I have noticed we generally catch bigger pike after dark, which is kind of interesting. I wouldn't say that I've ever specifically targeted pike after dark. It's more of an incidental bycatch type thing. I do target muskies after dark, which is kind of another subject. But if you kind of wanted to maybe weed out some of the walleyes, I don't know why you'd want to do that. You could run some bigger baits after dark. Basically, the smallest thing I'd put out is like a P10, upwards of like I've even put out like shallow raiders and stuff, like pretty good sized baits. Fishing really, really slow, and just the same areas we're fishing for walleyes in those like 5, 6, 7 feet of water. Anywhere there's weeds, there's going to be pike. And if you're fishing Wabisa and Monona, there's going to be muskies as well. If you're running those big baits though, if a P10 is the smallest bait you have out, if you catch a walleye, it's going to be really freaking big. So no matter what, if you're running those big baits and a board goes off, it's going to be something pretty cool. But I've never specifically tried to catch pike after dark, but when we do catch them, they're usually pretty big. In the daytime, I've definitely noticed that weeds tend to be the key, since they are kind of more of an ambush predator. I think they just prefer to have some place to kind of hide. So weeds are obviously kind of a gimme, but daytime, you got to have weeds. And as far as baits go, throw whatever the heck you want. Anything you want. If I had one spring pike bait to throw, it'd probably be a suspending jerk bait or a spinner bait. It seems like you're either catching bass on them or you're catching pike on them, one of the two. Sometimes you get both, but it seems like you're leaning heavier towards one or the other on a given day. So a suspending jerk bait would probably be my number one go-to for pike. All right. Here's a fun scenario, because now I'm in this boat, which is kind of fun. What if I have kids, or I'm taking kids fishing, and I just want them to catch something? Because we all know how attention spans can be. I fish with adults that have attention spans shorter than my almost 1-year-old kid. So I get it. So keeping people entertained can be kind of tricky sometimes. But a couple of things that I do to kind of keep people engaged, because I do fish with a lot of kids, switching baits a lot helps a ton. Not necessarily to catch fish, but just to keep kids interested or people interested, right? If you're throwing the same thing over and over and over again, it gets old, right? Especially my favorite is when we're fishing in a spot for like 20 minutes and we're just railing fish, and then there's like a 5-minute window where it's quiet. And I have like a 10-year-old kid that's like, are we gonna move now? It's like, dude, come on, you just caught like a 20-inch smallmouth. You really wanna move? Yeah, can we go now? Can we go fast again? Like, no, dude. So, but if you give them a different bait to throw, then all of a sudden it's interesting again. So switching baits a lot helps. Again, as far as like baits go, things that keep people interested, definitely lipless cranks, because you got to work them pretty fast. Spinner baits, because they're shiny. I've noticed kids really like throwing spinner baits. And honestly, just like a beetle spin works great. You catch literally everything that swims, and it keeps them entertained. You can fish it like a total putts if you wanted to. You can let it fall on the bottom. You can slow retrieve it. You can burn it. You can jig it. It works no matter what, as long as it's in the water. So that's a really good one. And I usually have kids throwing spinning gear. I know that's terrifying, but it's not as terrifying as having one throw a bait caster. So spinning reels, I feel like as soon as you graduated from a spin cast reel and you're pushing the button to a spinning reel, things get real and they take it way more seriously. So I would encourage you, if you're fishing with kids, if you can, try to get them into a spinning outfit as quick as you can, because it seems like all of a sudden they're like, ooh, I'm really doing this. Got a big kid rod. It keeps them a lot more entertained. If treble hooks scare the crap out of you, skip the lipless crank and just do the beetle spin or little spinner bait. I get it. I've only been hooked twice. I've been guiding, actually Madison Angling turned 8 a couple days ago, which is kind of wild. I've only been hooked twice, and both times were treble hooks and both times were kids. So if they scare you, obviously skip that. But again, anywhere shallow, wherever you can find shallow weeds, there's going to be fish. And there's going to be something that bites. They don't care if it's a white bass. They don't care if it's a largie, a walleye, a pike. It doesn't matter. So prime example of that is throwing a lipless crank. We're in Dangles Bay on Mendota, fishing about 3-4 feet of water, throwing those ripping wraps, just straight retrieving them. And this kid had an absolute freaking day. It was awesome. And after every fish, he's like, can we move? It's like, dude, no, stop it. But we were catching walleyes, largemouth. We got a couple pike too. Really quick action, and it's a heck of a lot of fun. So if I had to pick one bait to throw to catch as many different fish as possible, all different species, all different sizes, any time of day, it's going to be a small little bitty jerk bait of some kind. Either a number 8 or 10 husky jerk. I grabbed an 8, or a number 8 X-Wrap. And again, people were asking about color. I like the black gold, and anything kind of perchy looking, like this kind of green sort of shiner looking dude works really well. A little tiny jerk bait on a spinning rod. You can catch literally anything that swims. You can catch crappies, perch, bass, walleye, pike. I've even almost caught a muskie on one of those once. I got bit off, unfortunately, but little tiny jerk bait, twitch paws, any time of day. If you just want to catch something, that is the move. Absolutely 100%. Everything's going to eat those. And if you do get a crappie on it, it's going to be a giant crappie. And if you do get a perch, it's going to be a giant perch. But it does seem like any kind of small bait fish imitation, especially something you can kind of just hang in their face that suspends, start, stop. It's pretty much a guarantee to get bit. And just kind of a few sort of helpful tips for opener. I know this is kind of hard, depending on where you're fishing, what you're fishing for, but try to avoid the crowds as best you can. I know we all talk about it, and we all know that that's a good idea, right? Do the best you can to get away from people. It makes a big difference, especially if you're fishing in really shallow water. Like, let's say Lake Farm, right? Everybody's fishing bluegills and crappies right away. Early season, you're fishing 3 to 5, 6 feet of water. And there's days where there's 50, 60 boats crammed in there, and everybody's on spot lock or they're tooling around with their trolling motors. That's a lot of noise. And then you got your sonar pinging, clicking away, and all these different baits, right? Making all kinds of noise. That can be spooky. It can definitely turn fish off. So getting away and fishing the fringes of those groups can make a big difference. Another one too, this is kind of silly, but always keep a little bit of live bait on hand. I always have at least one little container of waxies, a couple dozen crawlers, because there's some days where meat just straight up works. If you just need to catch stuff, it's hard to beat meat sometimes. So, wow, can't believe I just said that out loud. It's going on YouTube. They're pretty lax with that stuff. Wow, here we go, getting real. It's, I'm gonna leave that alone. But yeah, so sometimes having the real thing definitely helps, and it's pretty easy to bring a couple dozen crawlers in a small cooler, right? Not a big deal. And just having a light spinning rod, like a panfish rod rigged up with a rocket bobber, some kind of small jig. Actually, I was gonna touch on that here. I totally didn't make a slide about that, but we'll talk about that in a second. But just some kind of light panfish rig that you could really quick and easy throw a little chunk of some kind of meaty dude on there and lob it in front of a fish. Because opener, especially for the first 2 weeks or so of the season with the water being super clear, there's a lot of times you just run into opportunities on fish, right? Like you just roll into a little channel or something and you're like, oh dude, there's like 4 walleyes sitting right there. What am I gonna throw at them? I'm gonna throw a panfish jig with half a crawler at it, and I'm probably gonna get one of them to eat. So having something rigged up for occasions like that is kind of cool. Instead of just scrambling around like, crap, what can I rig up real quick to throw at them? Just have a little panfish rig rigged up. Everything will eat like a little chunk of meat on a tiny little jig. I'm convinced you can catch just about anything on it. So have one rigged up, ready to go. And I already kind of talked about this before, but downsizing, especially on tough days. If it's full sun, flat calm, or it's a cold front, maybe it's just kind of a poopy day, but this is the one day this week that I get to go fishing, downsize. Don't be afraid to go small. Sometimes less is more, especially in the spring. I know we're kind of rolling with the big baits for the walleye stuff, but again, when things get tough, I will go a little bit smaller with some of that stuff too. And that's across the board. So even with a chatterbait, I'll go down to a smaller size, or a swim jig, I'll go down to a 1/4 ounce. Lipless cranks, I'll go down to like don't waste too much time if you're fishing shallow and you're just not catching fish, not seeing fish, not getting bit. Slide out a little deeper. You don't have to go too much deeper. So if I'm fishing 5, 6, 7 feet of water, I'm not catching fish, I'm gonna move out to 10, 12 feet of water. And usually you'll find something out a little bit deeper. So it doesn't have to be a huge change in depth, but if they're not in front of you, they're probably behind you. And since I didn't really touch on panfish a whole heck of a lot, this is actually basically the rig that I roll around with, ready to roll at any given time. So how many people fish with rocket bobbers? Okay, if you've never fished with rocket bobbers, grab one out of the bin before you leave. These things are amazing. Avoid bridge pilings if you can, because they do explode. I go through a lot of these. But basically, there's a couple different ways you can set these up. Most people, when they set up a bobber, they add enough weight to their rig that the bobber sits upright, right? There's the water, you get a bite, boop, bobber goes down. What's cool about rocket bobbers, if you fish them weightless and you let this thing lay on its side, when you get a bite, and especially in the spring when it's a really light bite, you could get just the tiniest little bite and it pivots and the bobber just stands up. They barely have to touch it and you see that bobber lift up, you know you got a fish, set the hook. So that's why I like these. And they also cast a mile. There's a reason why it's called a rocket bobber. So rocket bobber to a tiny little jig, and these guys have actually been working really, really, really well the last couple years. So Harley, who works here, the other tall dude who ties flies and stuff, he makes these little, it's almost like a woolly bugger for the fly guys in here, with a little tungsten bead, and these things absolutely crush just about everything you drop them in front of. This was my #1 go-to crappie presentation last year. We absolutely smashed them on these things. Didn't matter time of day, where we were, where they were at with their spawning progression. They murdered these. I have no idea why, but fished right under a rocket bobber, just slow, steady retrieve, and even days where you just drop it in front of them and they just come up and smack it. I don't know what it is about those, but they work incredibly well. So that's what I usually have rigged up on my spur of the moment panfish rod, my throw some little chunk of something at them spinning rod. You can absolutely add a waxy or a little chunk of worm to it, but most of the time we just throw that little beadhead dude at them and they eat it. Whether it's walleye, crappie, bluegills, it really didn't seem to matter, but those things saved the day quite a few times last year. So kind of a cool little dude. And they are barbless. That's one thing to keep in mind. So when you do set the hook on those, make sure you keep the rod loaded up. If you give them slack, sometimes they'll pop off, but just keep the rod loaded and you'll do just fine. And obviously getting them out is a lot easier. And one upside to the barbless little jiggy dudes is when you're unhooking a fish, you don't have to put as much force on it, so you're less likely to screw up your jig. You know, if you grab it kind of goofy, you're less likely to rip all the material off it, so you can get a lot more use out of it, which is kind of cool. So kind of a nice trade-off. Any questions? Any questions at all? Yes?
Using the rocket bobber
Yes.
in a slip bobber fashion?
Nope, just clipping it right on just like that.
You don't use it the other way? Because sometimes when I use it as a slip bobber, I get a lot of tangles.
Yep.
You know, it seems to...
I just keep it clipped directly on. Yep. And if I'm fishing deep, like I'm fishing more than 5 feet of water or so, or I've got it set deeper than that, then I'll go to a slip bobber. Okay. So basically, if you've got 5 feet of line between the jig and the bobber or less, rocket bobber is the move. If it's more than that, then go to a slip bobber. Otherwise, you're trying to whip like 5-6 feet of line and a bobber, and then it's a pain. It makes a mess. So, yep, good question. Any other questions, guys? Nothing? Are you serious? Yes.
I've got one, but it's not an early season question.
Okay.
So I can hold it if you want.
No. Ask, please.
I've been trying, I love smallmouth. I've been trying to catch them deep as I got better electronics on Madison Lakes, primarily in Mendota.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm out, you know, all the rock bars, you know, fishing 20 to 30
Mm-hmm.
with Castmaster, the Rapala thing, I can't think of the name.
Jig and wraps.
Jig and wrap,
Mhm.
stuff like that. And I'm catching walleyes,
Mhm.
number.
Yep.
But hardly any smallmouths. I catch more buffalo, I catch more catfish than I do smallmouths.
What time of year?
Summer to fall.
Probably fishing too deep. Slide up a little bit. So June, July, and August, I usually am not fishing deeper than about 20 feet, 25 at the most, but even upwards of 12 feet. Right on the outside weed edges is another really underrated place to find smallmouth, especially on Mendota. The smallies definitely outnumber the largies, probably 10 to 1 on Mendota. So they do inhabit a lot of places where you may not expect them. So one of the things I noticed is if there's an abundance of small perch in the weeds, there will be a crap load of smallmouth hanging on the outside weed edges.
Catch them, flipping the jig.
Yep. So the deep rock stuff, though, I would focus in more like 15 to 20. Shallow up a little bit, and Ned rigs and drop shots. Big time. Yep. Try more plastics.
I don't think they're that deep.
They can be, but it seems like I catch more of them up a little bit shallower. But they will be out deeper though. But yeah, sometimes the more aggressive stuff, I don't know what it is about smallmouth versus walleyes. It seems like the walleyes are a little more reactive to those kind of more aggressive jerk, type retrieves with spoons, jig and wraps. The smallies, I don't know. It seems like they kind of want a little bit more finesse in the summertime. Yep. So that's what I would do. I would just go a little shallower and try more like drop shots and plastics. I think you'll do really well. Yes?
What do you think about musky fishing at the beginning of the season? Do you usually wait until...
I wait. Yeah, I usually wait till June. Once the water kind of gets warm, starts to get them a little more colored up, they get a lot easier to catch. They like a lot of these other fish, they got done doing the hardest thing they have to do all year. And muskies are a little weird though, where they kind of just veg out when they're done spawning. Like bass post spawn, just put on a feed bag. Walleyes put on a feed bag. Bluegills put on a feed bag. Muskies are just kind of like, dude, that was rough. And then they just go vegetate. So they are catchable. Most of the fish we do catch are after dark up shallow, whether or not we're intentionally fishing for them or not. But I usually wait till June. It's a lot more predictable. If I am fishing early, there's kind of two schools of thought on muskies. There are fish that are up real shallow, warm water, kind of where you would expect to find them, right? In that, 6 feet of water or less, weed growth, that kind of thing. The biggest fish that I've run into in the spring are usually out in open water. which is kind of goofy. So it seems like the females, and this isn't like a hard and fast rule, but I've noticed a pattern where if you're just out tooling around on a super calm, sunny day, flat calm, the lake's an aquarium, you can just go look for stuff. If you're out in 12 to 15 feet of water, a lot of times you'll run into muskies that are just laying out there 3, 4, 5, 6 feet down, and they're usually big. So it seems like the big fish just kind of go out away from everybody and just chill. Like they just need a break. They're like, just leave me alone, dude. And they're just laying out in the middle of nowhere. Those fish, they're catchable, but I don't usually catch them casting. That's more of a trolling thing. It seems like they're a little less apt to come all the way into the boat and eat something, but we do get them trolling. And then as May goes on, there is a pretty good push of walleyes that'll push out into the basin as well, and usually big fish, big females that are just sliding out into the basin. I think maybe just doing the same thing. They're like, just get away from me, leave me alone, dude. And they're just going out in the basin. So when we're fishing for those suspended walleyes, a lot of times we'll run into muskies out there too. And that's anywhere from 15 to 30 feet of water. In fact, last year we were catching them over 50 feet of water on Mendota, running baits 7 feet down. Walleyes, not muskies. But on Wabisa and Monona, when we're doing the suspended walleye thing, it's almost guaranteed every day we're going to run into a muskie. Pretty much guaranteed. Whether or not we land it is a whole nother story. But yeah, those open water fish, more trolling, and then early, or not early, but the shallow fish are more casting. And if I really, really, really wanted to catch a muskie, like the first couple weeks of the season, I'm going to Wingra. I'm going to go fish the muskie pond. Throw a spinnerbait, throw a chatterbait. Lipless cranks work really well too. Just a big rattle trap works just fine. X-Wrap, whatever, Husky Jerk. So, but yeah, as far as like guiding goes, I don't start till June. It's way easier. Yep. Long answer, but yeah. Yep. Any other questions? Doesn't just have to be opener. Yes.
If I wanted to improve my success with panfish, smallmouth,
Mhm.
in like throughout the year, but I'm limited to a kayak, is there any advice you give me as far as things to look for or places?
I would say the first thing is not saying that you're limited by a kayak because you have a kayak. You can go a lot of places I can't go in my boat. So you're not at a disadvantage in a kayak at all. The only time you'd be in a disadvantage is in really big, crappy wind and waves. And I'm not even going to want to be out there either. So definitely not at a disadvantage. I would say, do you have electronics on it of any kind?
No.
That would be probably my biggest investment, would be some kind of electronics. And you don't need anything big. When I first started fishing out of basically a canoe when I was in high school, a buddy of mine and I shared a Vexilar. Like we had just enough money to buy a shitty old Vexilar and share it. We used to throw that over the side of the canoe and take it bluegill fishing, and it worked great. So having some kind of electronics, and the way that electronics are now, you can get a little, 5-inch Hummingbird for a few $100, and Pat has flasher batteries. They weigh 3, 4, or 5 pounds. So you're not adding a lot of weight to your kayak, and you can make your transducer mountable or movable or whatever. That would be my number one thing, is get some kind of a small locator, and that's going to change the game. Being able to find fish deeper and being able to find like weed edges and actually be able to know exactly where that weed edge is or where that drop off is, that's going to make a huge difference. That'd be my biggest suggestion. So a little bit of an investment, but it's 100% worth it. So yeah. Is that it?
I think
Okay.
we're good. Let's give Noah a round of applause. Great job as always. Again, want to thank everybody for coming out. These are great. But we will do the prize drawing here. I guess we'll do them in order of cost. So here is a Rapala Husky Jerk in it's a new color for them. So these have been popular. Noah likes these, and yeah. So you want to draw? Yeah.
Why do I have to do it?
Because your name's not in there.
Crap.
So for the Husky Jerk, what do we got?
Cullen Olson. All
There
right.
you go. Nice. Congrats. Thanks for coming out. And we're gonna do one of these chatterbait evos. I like this pattern. I don't know. It's like a perchy.
Perchy bluegill,
Yeah.
universal bait fish.
Yeah.
Ryan Ketter.
Hey, there you go. Nice.
Does a kid want it? I will give it to a kid.
Sure. I mean,
Who's the youngest person here?
Let's do that.
Well, that was really quick.
yeah.
The new owner of that.
There you go.
You're more than welcome.
And one more. We're
Oh,
doing
no, no, make her
What?
pick.
What?
I don't want to. I don't like this pressure.
There's
It's
no pressure.
fine.
You just grab them.
Okay.
It can't be the hardest thing you've done.
Yeah. Could be.
I didn't have a very hard day. I got barfed on this morning, but it's cool.
Oh, wait.
Oh, that's the one. Yeah.
Yeah?
Pick it. Yeah.
Did you see it? No. It's yours.
Do it again.
Is
All
it
right.
really?
It is. It is, Dave.
I love how you didn't even make it back in the bucket.
Well,
Here.
you said do it again.
We know we cheated if there's another one in here.
Yeah.
Justin Eckberg. All
right.
right.
The Maverick.
That's a good bait.
Yeah.
That is.
They're super awesome.
That's
yeah.
the bougie one. Don't lose that. Those are expensive.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Thanks again. Appreciate y'all coming out.
Thanks for coming out, guys.
Thanks
Appreciate
for being
it.
here. Thanks for being my hand model, too. I appreciate that.
No, I got a question.